Top 7 Youngest Serial Killers in the World. These people you are about to be exposed to are either stone-cold killers or mentally troubled individuals, depending on who you ask. But one thing is for sure, they are highly dangerous and have zero regard for life. So brace yourself. Some of these stories are bone-chilling. Craig Price. As a child and adolescent, Price had a secret life that would send shivers down your spine. His juvenile criminal record was like a script from a chilling thriller: breaking and entering, robbery, stalking, drug use, and assault, often committed against his own family members. You might wonder, how could a child be so violent? Well, it all began with a growth spurt that turned him into a towering figure, casting an intimidating shadow over his friends and even older relatives. With his newfound presence, young Price unleashed havoc upon his quiet community, the likes of which they had never seen before. He joined a gang of delinquent peers, breaking into houses and displaying cruelty to animals. But at first, these seemed like the misadventures of a misguided child, nothing to raise alarm bells about. Despite his criminal activities, Price managed to maintain a facade of good humor, fooling everyone around him. Little did they know that beneath that friendly exterior lurked a much darker side. Then, on a fateful day on July 1987, when Price was just 13, he crossed paths with a jogger named Rebecca Spencer. Something snapped inside him, unleashing a sick urge. With a glance to ensure no witnesses, he attacked her, leaving her for dead in the woods. When authorities discovered Rebecca's mutilated body, the horror was beyond imagination. In their peaceful neighborhood, no one could fathom that a 13-year-old boy could commit such a heinous act. Investigations led to dead ends, and for 2 years, Price remained hidden in the shadows. But darkness has a way of resurfacing. 2 years later, at the age of 15, Price, high on LSD, broke into another neighbor's house belonging to the Heaton family. His intent was robbery, but panic led him down a sinister path. He encountered the mother, Joan, and in a fit of terror, beat and strangled her. Her screams awoke her young daughters, Jennifer and Melissa. Just like before, Price reached for a knife from the kitchen and inflicted unimaginable horror. He stabbed all 3 family members, biting Joan and one of the daughters, and crushing Melissa's skull with a kitchen stool. In the midst of this gruesome act, Price's hand bore the scars of his brutality. Little did he know, those injuries would be the threads that unraveled his web of darkness, ultimately revealing the true nature of the boy who had terrorized their quiet neighborhood. A few days later, some officers were patrolling the area when they came across Price. They decided to stop to question him and ask him casually if he heard anything about the murder. He said he did, but told the officers he knew nothing about it. But then, one of the officers saw that his hand was bandaged. When asked why, Price lied that he had tried to vandalize a car and injured his hand in the process. Why would he tell the officers that he tried to vandalize a car? The claim had seemed too suspicious, so the officers did deeper investigations, as Price being the prime suspect. And that was it. They found a connection to the murder, and Price was arrested. He later got sentenced to 25 years in prison. Eric Smith. Meet Eric M. Smith, an American criminal whose name became synonymous with horror. Born on January 22, 1980, his life took a dark turn on August 2, 1993, in Steuben County, New York. Eric Smith's sinister story unfolds against a backdrop of torment. A loner by nature, he was relentlessly bullied for his distinctive features: protruding low-set ears, thick glasses, fiery red hair and a tapestry of freckles. It was a life marked by isolation and cruelty. But it was on that fateful day in 1993 that the nation would be gripped by terror. At just 13 years old, Eric Smith committed a heinous act that would etch his name into infamy. His innocent victim was 4-year-old Derek Robbie, born on October 2nd, 1988. Smith lured young Derek to a remote, desolate location within a park, a place where innocence would be irrevocably shattered. There, he strangled the helpless boy, crushing his tender head with 2 weighty rocks. The horrors didn't end there. Smith undressed Derek's lifeless body and subjected it to unspeakable acts of brutality, violating the child with a tree limb. The cause of Derek's demise: blunt trauma to the head, coupled with asphyxia. It took merely 2 days after Derek Robbie's funeral for Smith to confess this monstrous crime. In 1994, he was convicted of second-degree murder, and the sentence was chillingly fitting for his age. The maximum then available for juvenile murderers: a minimum of 9 years to life in prison. As the years passed behind prison walls, Smith grappled with remorse. He composed an apology letter to the Robbie family and summoned the courage to read it on public television. He said, "I know my actions have caused terrible loss in the Robbie family, and for that I am truly sorry." His letter painted a haunting picture of the life Derek would never experience, a poignant lament for the future stolen from an innocent child. But the specter of parole loomed over Smith. 5 times since 2002, he sought his release, each time met with denial. The world watched as this dark figure lingered in the depths of incarceration, his next parole eligibility slated for April 2012. If ever granted parole, Smith harbored intentions to return to Savona, a prospect that sent chills down the spines of those who knew his history. From a juvenile facility to the maximum security Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York, his existence became one of steel bars and razor wire. As of April 9, 2010, Eric M. Smith remained a prisoner within the grim confines of the Clinton Correctional Facility, a living reminder of the unfathomable darkness that can reside within a human soul. Alyssa Bustamante. This story takes place in a small town in Missouri where the weight of a chilling story unfolded. It is the haunting tale of Alyssa Bustamante, a name that sends shivers down the spines of everyone present. She was no ordinary teenager, but a young enigma locked in the throes of a macabre secret. 18 years old, but her life had taken a fateful turn, one that would cast shadows over her existence forever. The crime she committed was nothing short of a horror story brought to life. Elizabeth Olton, an innocent 9-year-old neighbor, fell victim to the unimaginable in what they termed a thrill killing. As Alyssa stood there, facing a life sentence with a glimmer of hope for parole, her words hung heavily in the air. The courtroom, wrapped in an eerie silence, witnessed a performance that was both tragic and surreal. With a tremor in her voice, Alyssa uttered words of remorse directed at the grieving mother and siblings of her victim. "I know words can never be enough," she said, "and they can never adequately describe how horribly I feel for all of this." She stabbed, strangled, and even slit the young girl's throat before leaving her lifeless body in a shallow grave hidden beneath a blanket of leaves. It was a twisted quest to understand what it felt like to take a life. In her diary, she poured out the sinister truth, a confession that would send shivers down anyone's spine. "I just killed someone," she wrote, her words devoid of remorse. "I don't know how to feel at the moment." And then, a chilling revelation. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. But what made this dark tale even more unsettling was the contrast. The same girl who reveled in unspeakable acts listed killing people as a hobby on her YouTube page. Her Twitter messages hinted at a troubled soul, speaking of addiction and terrors. She was a puzzle of darkness, a riddle that confounded all who tried to make sense of it. In the courtroom, Elizabeth's mother, Patty Priest, spared no words, labeling Alyssa Bustamante as an evil monster and expressing her raw hatred for the girl who had taken her daughter away. The prosecution sought justice, arguing for a life sentence and then some, accounting for the years stolen from Elizabeth. Appropriate and fitting, they said, but Alyssa's defense had their own narrative. They spoke of her depression, a haunting cloud that hung over her existence, and a suicide attempt that cast a shadow on her actions. It was a battle of narratives, one pitting darkness against despair. In the end, the courtroom was left with a question that may never have a satisfying answer. What drove Alyssa Bustamante to commit such a heinous act? Was it the cool deliberation of a calculated mind, or the chaos of a tortured soul? The story of this teenager who danced on the edge of darkness would forever be etched in the annals of the macabre, a tale of horror and intrigue that would continue to haunt the imagination. Edmund Kemper. On an August day in 1964, when Kemper's monstrous desires took a tragic turn, his grandmother, innocently crafting a children's book, became the first victim of his insatiable hunger for violence. His grandfather, returning from a routine grocery trip, would not escape this nightmare either. A chilling call to his mother followed, her voice urging him to summon the authorities. In the eyes of the law, Kemper was just 15, but he'd already danced with death. Atascadero State Hospital became his sanctuary, where in a twisted twist of fate, he forged an unsettling bond with his psychologist, even taking on the role of his assistant. Through cunning manipulation, he wove a web of trust, gaining access to forbidden knowledge until he held the keys to his own release. Emerging from that grim institution, Kemper returned to his mother's care, despite doctors' warnings who saw through his charade. He portrayed himself as reformed, concealing his juvenile records forever, sealing his fate with his unsuspecting mother. But darkness doesn't fade easily. Kemper's imposing stature and immense weight haunted California's highways between 1972 and 1973, where his reign of horror began. Female students who placed their trust in the wrong stranger found themselves ensnared in his web. Isolated, they met their gruesome ends, stabbed, shot, smothered, their lifeless bodies violated in unspeakable ways. His apartment became a chamber of horrors, a place of grotesque intimacy and dissection. The victims faced cruel fates, discarded in remote ravines, buried in forsaken fields. One unfortunate soul's severed head found a grotesque resting place in his mother's garden, a horrific tribute to the woman who had tormented him. His murderous spree was often ignited by arguments with the very woman who had given life to him. April 1973 marked the climax of this twisted saga. With a pickhammer, Kemper silenced the voice that had haunted him for so long, his mother's. What followed was a grotesque desecration, the defilement of her headless body, and the gruesome use of her severed head as a macabre dartboard. He confessed to acts of necrophilia and cannibalism without remorse. The co-ed's killer's reign of terror finally ended when he called the police himself, confessing to his dark deeds unfurling before them like a nightmarish tapestry. His trial painted a portrait of madness, but he was found guilty of 8 counts of murder. The death penalty eluded him, as it was suspended, leaving him with a life sentence. In the grim annals of Santa Cruz's history, Kemper's name joined those of other monsters who had stalked its streets. A sinister cloud hung over the town, earning it the eerie title of the murder capital of the world. In the shadows, Herbert Mullen prowled, and years earlier, John Linley Fraser had unleashed his own horrors. Behind prison walls, Kemper's name endures, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind intelligence's facade and the horrifying dance of a co-ed killer. Thomas Lane. Thomas Lane is the infamous perpetrator of the Chardon High School shooting, which occurred on February 27, 2012, at Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio, United States. 3 male students died within 2 days following the incident. 2 other students were hospitalized, one of whom sustained several serious injuries requiring extensive rehabilitation, and the other suffering a minor injury. The seriously injured victim had been declared permanently paralyzed. A 6th student sustained a superficial wound. While rumors of a warning of the event had been posted on the internet circulated, student witnesses identified the shooter as Thomas T.J. Lane III, a 17-year-old juvenile. Although police were initially hesitant to publicly identify the juvenile after he was apprehended, by the evening on February 28th, authorities confirmed that the suspect was Lane. The weapon Lane used in the shooting was a .22 caliber handgun. At an initial court hearing, the prosecutor revealed that he admitted to shooting 10 rounds of ammunition from the gun during the shooting, which began in the school cafeteria at approximately 7:30 a.m. shortly after school began. Although Lane told police that he did not know the victims and that they were chosen randomly, witnesses stated that it appeared he targeted a specific student and the group he was sitting with in the cafeteria. After the shooting occurred, Lane reportedly left the building. Witnesses stated he was chased from the building by a teacher and was arrested a short time later in a location outside the school. Lane was ultimately indicted on 3 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated attempted murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. He was initially detained as a juvenile pending further court action. Reaction to the event prompted a statement from Ohio Governor John Kasich. Several prayer vigils were held and a fund for the victims was established. Thousands of people attended one of the vigils, at which the governor spoke, the night after the attack. President Barack Obama gave his condolences to the school principal in a telephone call following the incident. Analysis of the crime and comparisons to similar attacks began immediately following the shooting. Lane received 3 life sentences on March 19, 2013. Brenda Spencer. As Brenda entered her teenage years, the turbulent atmosphere at home began to take a toll on her fragile psyche. She withdrew from her peers, becoming increasingly isolated and withdrawn. She harbored a deep-seated resentment towards the world, an anger that simmered beneath the surface. On a fateful morning in January 1979, the storm within Brenda Spencer reached its zenith. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle gifted to her by her father, she took a position at her bedroom window, overlooking the Cleveland Elementary School across the street. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting long shadows over the campus where innocent children were beginning their day. Without warning, Brenda opened fire. The crack of gunfire shattered the morning calm, sending the school into a state of panic and chaos. Children screamed, teachers rushed to protect their students, and the entire community was thrust into a nightmare beyond imagination. In the wake of the shooting spree, 2 adults lost their lives and 8 innocent children were wounded, some gravely. The incident sent shockwaves through San Diego, a tight-knit community unaccustomed to such senseless violence. The wounds ran deep, not just in the bodies of the victims, but in the collective soul of the town. The aftermath of Brenda Spencer's heinous act left the community in mourning, grappling with grief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. Parents clung to their children, fearing for their safety, while teachers and students alike struggled to make sense of the tragedy that had just befallen them. As the investigation unfolded, Brenda Spencer showed no remorse for her actions, her motivations shrouded in a cloud of bitterness and resentment. She coldly admitted that she had chosen her targets simply because she didn't like Mondays, uttering the chilling words, "I don't like Mondays." This livens up the day. Brenda Spencer's callousness sent shockwaves far beyond San Diego, making headlines across the nation and around the world. The tragedy became a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked anger and the importance of addressing the mental health of troubled youth. The Bever Brothers. The Bever Brothers, Robert and Michael, were at the center of this darkness. Growing up, they were known as quiet and reclusive, keeping mostly to themselves. Their home, while appearing normal from the outside, was said to be filled with an atmosphere of control and isolation, a breeding ground for twisted ideologies. As the brothers entered their teenage years, their behavior took a disturbing turn. They began to immerse themselves in violent video games and consumed online content that glorified acts of violence. The lines between reality and fantasy blurred in their impressionable minds. On a fateful summer evening in 2015, the Bever Brothers' sinister plans were set into motion. Armed with knives and a desire for carnage, they launched a brutal attack on their own family. In a horrifying act of violence, Robert and Michael systematically stabbed and bludgeoned their parents and 3 younger siblings to death. The scene inside their once peaceful home resembled a nightmare that would haunt the community for years to come. The chilling details of the crime sent shockwaves through Broken Arrow. 5 lives were ruthlessly taken, and 2 other siblings who had managed to survive the onslaught were left physically and emotionally scarred. The senselessness of the act left the community in a state of profound grief and disbelief. The Bever Brothers, in the aftermath of the brutal murders, were apprehended by the police. Their motives appeared rooted in a disturbing fascination with violence and a desire for notoriety. Their cold and calculated demeanor during their arrest and subsequent interrogations sent shivers down the spines of those tasked with investigating the crime. The trial that followed exposed the chilling depths of the brothers' depravity. Both Robert and Michael were found guilty of the murders, and they were sentenced to a life in prison without the possibility of parole. The community grappled with the sense of betrayal and shock that their neighbors, seemingly just like any other family, could harbor such evil within their midst. But what do you think about these serial killers? Would you consider their actions products of troubled minds or sinister, dark hearts?